Welcome to another Human First AI Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague with Avenue 9. And my guest this week is Heather. And I meant to ask you before we started, I'm going to guess Leigh Flannery. Or Leigh.
No, it's Leigh.
Oh, no. It
is
Leigh?
You had a 50-50 shot there. You had a 50-50 shot.
I know. And I was going to also make the joke that I think this is coming out really close to St. Patrick's Day, too. So I was going to give it like the Heather Leigh Flannery pronunciation just so that people remember it. But that's all right. You can find her at ai-mindsystems.org. She's the founder and CEO of AI Mindsystems Foundation. They're looking at innovations for humanity's health, prosperity, privacy. She's done work in blockchain. We can ask her about crypto. I'm super excited about this conversation. It could go a variety of ways. But Heather, I wanted to start first with humanity and the human side of things. It's a human first podcast here. So you're doing a ton of work and you've kind of been in DC and government regulation and stuff for a while too. Tell us a little bit about why you think the human first side of things and the humanity initiatives are crucial in this AI blockchain technology world.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And it's great to be here. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that it has already come to pass that proving our humanity in digital environments is non-trivial and is not standardized and is not automatable. And already right now, in the first quarter of 2025, we're in situations where we may be interacting with any number of agents and bots. The we might be our own agents and bots that also need to interact in massive new ecosystems where anything that used to be an API endpoint today can be an agent that is interacting on behalf of whatever entity it might be representing. So when we think about, from you, the person, to we, the people, as Americans, we already live in a digital first society. Our personal data, our health information, it is being persisted and stored, utilized, monetized in almost every action we take in modernity, including every breath we take, every step we take, everywhere we go. Our very humanity is now expressed in a continuous, never-ending, enlarging field of data around us, sharded across thousands of silos. There are already what I would refer to as decreasingly legal uses of personal and health information, and undoubtedly immoral and unethical uses. Whether they may remain technically legal for some short period of time, I say the writing is on the wall. The kinds of data practices that marketers and researchers around the world depend on today are going to be replaced with a different paradigm, a different regime, and it must be centered on the person, the data subject. So that person has a new role to play in society and a lot of control and empowerment to recover.
Well, that's going to be a huge conversation, and I can't wait to dive into it because I see so many implications on multiple sides of this. One, I think, is the fight to keep the internet and these AI technologies open source so that there's freedom and it's not all monetized or monopolized by big, tech companies and governments that control it all. On the other side, you also have to create guardrails for safety and some tracking, especially on generative AI stuff of who owns what, made what, said what's real, what's not real, and all that kind of stuff. And then the individual side, we haven't really talked a lot about yet, but your work in the blockchain and in health and privacy is such a critical component of this, which is the personal side of things. What do we want to keep private, and how do we choose to have our own privacy or I guess, just value systems in some of these wider technological systems. And I think that's going to be really hard going forward to balance all three of those things.
Very challenging, especially if corporations and governments acting on the people for a range of goals, they have network boundaries, business boundaries, systems boundaries. They've got IT staffs in the thousands. They've got enormous resources, all pointing right now on how to maintain competitive differentiation and advantage in this era of AI that's moving so fast. Everyone is afraid, genuinely afraid, to stop and consider the implications, because it's an existential threat to companies and governments both to wait and stop while potential competitors or adversaries are not waiting or stopping. So we are all leveraged into moving as fast as we can, and we're afraid of the consequences of not advancing and not innovating to the utmost of our ability, as expressed from every corporation and every government agency. And on the other hand, all of us know how this could go so badly awry, and how difficult it would be to pull all of it back and re-implement in new systems of governance and control. We know for sure, and you mentioned this, I'm really glad that you did, presently there's very little economic distribution of value creation from AI outside of the largest hyperscalers and early stage AI companies that have blown up into anything that would reflect individual people, families, and communities. And the idea that we can separate logically a data economy from an AI economy is silly. They are one in the same. They are completely intertwined in every dimension. And there's no possibility for an individual person to ever achieve the kind of empowerment with these incredible tools that corporations and governments can achieve unless they too are able to use those tools for their own aims, absent any conflict of interest, just as every other party is advocating for its own interests and goals. So vitally, individual people have to graduate to an entirely new technological paradigm. And it's of the significance, like, remember, we were chatting about, 80s flashbacks, and remember how there was a time when the idea that every single human being would have their own internet address in the form of this email and whatever that meant, and how crazy that was. And at a time, and there was a number of years where the thought that every person would have their own phone number was just madness. What I'm saying is a paradigm shift along those lines, but bigger, needs to occur, where individual people have to have the technological empowerment of corporations and governments. And since corporations are already treated as people under US law, that becomes all the more important.
Yeah, I have several questions here in different ways we could go. Before we go spiral too deep, like, one of the questions I want to ask you is, like, we'll play this out. What does that mean, 10, 15 years in the future if we don't do it? The other side is the optimism side. But before we spiral, sometimes these conversations can go pretty dark pretty fast. So before we go there is optimism, right? You mentioned the internet and email is still open source, really, and democratized, that nobody owns email, even though there are large monopolies in the space. And same thing largely with the internet. And things like blockchain and other things exist, like crypto, to kind of keep any one country or individual or corporation from dominating these spaces. So it does give me hope that these systems have been executed successfully, at least in the past, enough to keep us in reasonably competitive spaces. Where do you find hope in this discussion? Because I know you have the National Hero Initiative, where you're helping our military families and veterans get like healthcare and stuff, that there are groups doing cool things and there are people looking out for it, but I don't feel like they get the same voice as some of the dark side of the story, or these billionaires that are making crazy decisions, and the crazy amounts of, $500 billion being sunken into some of the other sides of the project that really, in my opinion, tip the scale. So where do you see, well, maybe the individuals winning, or the systems even winning in playing out the way that you would hope?
So there's if for anybody out there that's been part of the Web3 or blockchain community, there's this trope that you will have gotten tired of hearing. Blockchain is a team sport. And what I think is important is to recognize that AI is also absolutely a team sport. That no one entity custodies or can access the quality or quantity or type of data necessary to train or validate every conceivable kind of AI. And so when people win, they're not going to be winning alone any more than corporations or governments will be winning alone. After all, corporations win because they're serving their customers. They're delighting their customers. Governments win because they are politically winning the loyalty of their constituents through creating ostensibly real value for their constituents. So people, though, do have to elevate the role they play to become a much more empowered actor in that interplay between corporations and governments, which today is just a bilateral and multilateral effect that doesn't really have the person. The person is a passive party being influenced. And the most that we have is we've got our Dropbox accounts, and we've got our email addresses, and we can text and we can message, and we've got our social accounts. And now we've got access to some degree to free LLMs that are incredibly empowering and useful, also not entirely trustworthy. So there's a little bit of a compromise there. But for humans to win, individual people to win, they have to be able to elevate and escalate their activity relative to the activity of these other two categories. In the National Hero Initiative that you mentioned, we have a cohort of heroes that we've identified that have a significance to American society, not only for our patriotic duty to support and empower those who have served and will serve us, and potentially even to the point of making the ultimate sacrifice or being willing to lay down their lives for any of us at any moment, should the occasion arise. So we have a duty to serve those who serve us, and that's a very important driver behind the National Hero Initiative. There's another dimension to it as well, which is that our nation needs to be better prepared for emergencies such as what we saw with COVID-19, but could, in emergencies that could be quite a bit worse. And in those circumstances, our first responders have to be kept healthy and safe in order to care for the rest of us. It's like putting on your oxygen mask first if the plane's going down. Same idea. Yeah. So by empowering this cohort first, prioritizing this cohort first and empowering them, we are in turn better supporting our ability to keep those safe in emergency situations who are protecting and serving the rest of us. So it's a twofold motive. The National Hero cohort includes active duty military service members, not through a relationship with the Department of Defense, but rather with them in their community levels and all of their immediate family members, veterans and their families, and first responder labor classes in the U.S. and their immediate families, which are heavily overrepresented by veterans of the U.S. military in first responder job categories. So We are seeking to create the systems of change in proportionality of empowerment and capability, empowering that cohort first, and the emergency preparedness, resilience, recovery, resilience, response category is one important piece of it. But right now, well-being, that can be not a single AI model, not one magic AI solution, but rather by creating the construct for individual people to be able to train and trust and operate their own self-sovereign AI agents and their own self-sovereign digital twin and personas of same. That is the mechanic through which radical empowerment that far exceeds any natural intelligence's ability to optimize in complexity can be achieved. And then blockchain and Web3 plays a huge role in that. And I'm excited to nerd out on that part.
If you want we'll get there in a minute. I want to zoom in on what you said there, though, and make sure that everybody understands that. I think, for small businesses and marketers is the place that I play. And I think, small business has a huge role to play in, again, kind of keeping everything else in check in our government. I love your mission of first responders because, again, they're such a big group and so important. I think everybody kind of knows, like, well, we can't just get rid of them like that. We want these roles. We like these functions. And sometimes in other industries, that's not true. People can kind of dismiss or disrupt things without, even considering the consequences. But in small business, the AI opportunity and why I jumped in with both feet and Avenue 9 is it sort of resets that playing field again. It's happened a few times throughout our lifetimes, even I feel like, but just like the internet kind of reset and e-commerce took us globally, this AI, if we get it into the hands of individuals or small groups of people, can really allow them to compete and have a outsized voice or power compared to some of these larger entities. And especially with like an open AI project, everybody gets access to the same information, the same, artificial intelligence. And then the question becomes like, how do you use it? How do you leverage that for yourself? How do you be more flexible and more creative and set up systems that serve you and your purposes versus somebody else's? And I think it's a really cool opportunity that if the AI didn't exist, it would be really hard for these other groups to continue to compete in our society. What's your take on that?
Well, I do agree that there are there are centralized and closed sourced AI breakthroughs that by what they have spawned in the ecosystem at large and the native platforms and services being made generally available, that is a directly empowering function for individual people. When I think about empowerment of an individual person and the potential for goal attainment, there's a framework that is a validated framework with peer-reviewed evidence that gives a system of defining well-being of a person. And it goes across 8 dimensions of well-being, and they are emotional, physical, occupational, intellectual, financial, social, environmental, and spiritual. And across those 8 dimensions of well-being, we can have self-sovereign personal AI agents that are domain experts in all of those respective fields and trained on our personal and private data. And critically, it's not just how something is trained. It's its deployment pattern, it's its operating model, it's its capital structure, it's governance. So we can bring those capabilities under a new governance system that defines, that formally and officially secures direct ownership and control and privacy and security of person AI and data assets, as distinct from enterprises that make custody copies of those assets, for example. The so the I
Tell me more about what that looks like, and if we play it out. I think we've seen in social media what it looks like when somebody else owns your data and they're reselling all of your activity and you get nothing from it. We don't see a dime from the billions that Facebook or somebody like that makes off of our activity and our information. And then we've also seen systems change, like college sports, where all of a sudden, when we give the rights to your name, image, and likeness to athletes, they can now all of a sudden make millions of dollars that were previously being made by the organizations that controlled those systems. So there can be shifts in this, but what does it look like? And what would it look like in maybe your ideal vision of the future, where we each got our power back and our rights to our data and AI and ability to monetize our activities and attention?
I think that it represents exponential increases in quality of life, prosperity, health, and privacy for individual people. Not incrementalism here. I'm talking about orders of magnitude. I'm talking about a reclaiming of the civil liberties that underpin the foundation of our country that were inadvertently lost during the digitization of society that is, Web 2. And the ability to use tools of this level of power and capability means that we are going to be able to achieve, for example, precision health that is all about us, the individual person, in a way that is today economically and scientifically blockaded by many, many factors. You can't create medicines for one person, for example, which is where it ultimately needs to go, if you don't have that person's data estate, not only digital biology assets, but everything about the social, environmental, occupational determinants of health, so many factors. It's not possible to have an individual person be able. Let's say you are at or near the poverty level. Let's say you work 2 or 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. You may have almost no or negative cash flow every month as a result of that. That's all sounds like really bad news, right? There's a piece of good news where we have an extraordinary set of social safety net programs publicly funded here in the US. We also are the most generous nation on earth, with incredible philanthropic resources, from large philanthropies to community-based organizations and individual Americans who give and try to help their fellow members of their community. Nevertheless, people here in the US drown in that sea of goodwill, and United States veterans are a tremendous example of that, where there is so much focus and resourcing going to matters related to veterans from both the public and private sector. Yet a horrifying number of veterans are still committing suicide every single day. And that's an example of drowning in a sea of goodwill, which is from an essay authored by Colonel David Sutherland, U.S. Army retired, that inspired me greatly and my colleagues to create the National Hero Initiative, because the resources are there, but they cannot be orchestrated or integrated. And an individual person would never have the time, and often doesn't have the capacity, especially if they're affected by diseases of despair, mental health disorders, depression, substance use disorder, etc. Using these tools you could, in fact, figure out every public sector and every philanthropic sector resource that could aid you in keeping a roof over your head next month. And that's the kind of thing that we can make possible, and intend to under National Hero.
That's a cool idea. That an AI agent working on your behalf can fill out these requests for help, and a lot of times that's the hardest part of getting help is proving that you qualify and going through all these hurdles, and especially when you're starving, depressed, or otherwise incapacitated. That's a really interesting concept. I like that. Again, if you want to learn more about that cause or donate, go to ai-mindsystems.org. It's right on the homepage there, the National Hero Initiative. Intel and others have a case study with you there, and you're doing some really good work there in DC. So that's fun. And before we get too far along, I wanted to ask you maybe what you think the opposite is. So I told you I was going to delay the doom and despair side, but if we don't take action or these things don't go the way that we would expect, and governments and or big companies are the only ones that control the AI and they own all of the data and influences and impact, what does the opposite of the optimistic future look like? Or what are the downsides and risks for individuals, I guess?
Yes, they're significant. In the event that a degree of empowerment that is on par or roughly in parity with enterprises and governments cannot be realized by an individual person, there's already an enormous power asymmetry. But it will be as if corporations and governments have the powers of gods and we are mere mortals. And when you consider that already any executive in any well-resourced organization right now today already is able to have fine-tuned, specialized AI models across every discipline of any importance to that business, trained on their private information and serving up not only isolated guidance, but interacting with one another to orchestrate and integrate across many different disciplines and fields of knowledge and serve up incredibly optimized scenarios and programs and decision guidance. Now it's going to get much better than that, but that's already there right now, this moment. And the degree of effectiveness, efficiency, and ability to execute with diminishing labor demands, not increasing labor demands. Whereas an individual person's life will still have every piece of manual tedium and every element of, opening things that arrive at your door that are pieces of wood pulp that someone printed something on, and then you have to call a phone number or do something.
Right.
That's what individual people's lives consist of. And the speed of commerce and the speed of decision making is already moving past individual humans' ability to track with and comprehend.
Yeah, I think it has for a while. So maybe the way I would do it, and I'm kind of showing my cards here, but I think Facebook and the social media is a great example, and TikTok and stuff, where they know more about you and driving human behavior, and they have the best scientists in the world and tens of thousands of programmers with billions of dollars at their assets. They can program the phone to keep you addicted to it more than you can resist it. They just kind of have it's a weighted game. It's worse than a casino, right? That you're like, we know the house is going to win in this scenario, and we've been seeing it for the last decades. And I'm optimistic that there's been some pushback on that. I mean, I changed the settings on my phone and did a digital detox and everything, and it's in black and white, and all the alerts and dings and stuff are turned off, but I don't think the majority of Americans live that way. And I think that if you add AI and super intelligence on top of all of those resources, you just see those scales getting tipped even more. Is that a fair way to say it?
Absolutely. And there's already, we have populations with generations of broken institutional trust already in place. Trust in the media from the full political spectrum is at an all-time low. And we are now in a situation where, what happened with H.G. Wells and the War of the Worlds could happen again right now. And I am an expert. I mean, no one should call themselves an expert in this field that moves fast. But I mean, it's all I do, right? It's all I do
Right.
is think about these problems and work on them. And if that were to happen today, if there were a bunch of announcements about exactly what was going on with War of the Worlds, I would be extremely hard pressed to know whether it was real or not. And I'm not alone. So the effect of being able to gaslight entire populations, for them to be manipulated without even knowing they were vulnerable in the first place, for there to be increasing culture wars where factions and segments are being manipulated in an automated, free, and extremely efficient and highly scientifically targeted way. You can imagine civil wars. You can imagine horrible social uprisings.
We've already seen these. We don't have to imagine them. They have happened. We have had people use, and largely human power, but computer programs, social media and stuff, to create fake accounts, that create fake arguments, that create fake dissent and fake protests that lead to fake engagements and elections and other things around the world. It's already happened. That isn't a future use case, but I can definitely see where you're going of that amplifying.
Wait, you think about sure. A standard practice in marketing of A/B testing, different headlines, themes, etc. That process running in every conceivable communications element at near light speed, and continuously optimizing all the time with increasingly narrow segmentation and specificity. It's just incredibly important. I think all of those genies are out of the bottle, as it were. We need to implement good governance to the best of our ability, but that can't be stopped. What must happen is a corresponding renaissance of the power of the individual and being brought up to equivalency, so that a person is not simply naked in the wilderness fighting, space robots from the future. Because that's the delta we're talking about here. So
normally I do end with that question. I feel like we've already covered it, like which sci-fi movie are you most likely to see us end up in 30 years from now? Terminator, Matrix, Star Wars, or Star Trek is the optimistic one, or any others of your favorite. Do you have a quick short answer? Because I do want to ask you one more question after this.
I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I'm an even bigger fan of Dune. And when I read Frank Herbert's Dune books as a kid, they changed the whole course of my life and informed the rest of my future. And one of the things that I love the most is they had in that story the Butlerian Jihad, where intelligent robots rose up and was annihilating humanity, as the backstory of these. And what happened in response was a non-digital radical humanism, where the potential of human beings was actually far exceeds what we think it is. We've got a pretty low bar, a pretty and a pretty small way of defining the mind, body, spirit that is a human being. So that I love the technical progressivism and the transhumanism that taps into the deepest human potentials. And that will mean in cooperative partnership between artificial and natural, or machine and natural intelligences. And
I
so
love that. That's a great answer. If I had to guess, I haven't given mine yet. I would prefer something like Star Trek: The Next Generation, where we've kind of figured out some harmonious ways to behave in the universe. My best guess would probably be Back to the Future 2. It was set 10 years ago, but feels like a lot of commercialism, a lot of ridiculous gadgets, and some cool things along the way that kind of mixes into a big mess of commercialism.
To be clear, I'm not, for those that are fans of Dune and know the story well, I am not suggesting that that's the outcome that I want or think is going to happen. I just love that dimension of radical exponential empowerment of individual human beings.
Yeah. I love that. And I love how nerdy the last 3 minutes of this conversation has been. So I have one last question for you, which we didn't quite get to, which was the crypto angle on all of this, because it is sort of an interesting exit ramp for all of the stuff that we've been talking about here, that it's decentralized, secure, non-government owned way of securing information, money, other platforms, and if we could set up AI in some sort of these, that it's seems to me a very interesting exit ramp for us. You've spent a long time in crypto, and you had to say you were an expert because I didn't say it, but I mean, you've worked for Microsoft, you've done big things and in this space for a long time, and lobbying and looking at the futures and regulations and stuff. What about crypto is so exciting for you, and give us maybe the short 3-5 minute version of why you think that's an interesting tool in this fight that we've been talking about here so far.
Well, it's, to me, absolutely critical path to the achievement of all we've been describing. As a metaphor, AI models, regardless of within what boundaries they're deployed or how they're operated, have only the same level of security and trust guarantees that are associated with any software application. They're nothing just but another executable out there. They have nothing about their operation, their decision making, their control is any different than some executable on your hard drive that lets you take a screen cap or whatever. It's just another piece of software. And that isn't good enough for what AI actually is, not by an order of magnitude. We must have systems of trust, validation, and assurance of a whole sweeping constellations of actions, decisions, choices, etc. And blockchain and Web3 and that family of technologies is really the only way to achieve that. Including not just for individual people, but for corporations and governments as well. And so this is a family of technologies of equivalent significance, regardless of sector. But for the individual person, and for AI models as well and agents, it's Web3 primitives are the core of how it is that you would ultimately prove humanity, or prove that model is the model that you thought it was. It's also the heart of integrating privacy-enhancing technologies and verifiable compute, both hardware and software-dependent modalities for that. And then when you consider the speed of commerce and the speed of collaboration and decision-making available in a massively agentic ecosystem, and you think about what transactions consist of, if those transactions are happening in models that are settling out to fiat currency and transacting the old-fashioned way, it would grind some of the greatest potentials for good to an absolute halt, and it would be the rate limiting factor of the speed of the growth of an economy and the speed of the growth of businesses. Similarly, if you don't have confirmed immutable transaction tracking and the ability to audit what will be orders of magnitude more economic volume, then every single problem we see in traditional finance will just be correspondingly amplified, while the rate of any of the positive outcomes is just, bubble gum is pushed in all the gears. So using digital assets and being able to enforce digital scarcity and using Web3 primitives for verification, validation, identities of all things, not just humans, including AI models, locations, legal entities, you name it.
That's cool.
Those are some examples of why a new data economy and a new AI economy that is trustworthy and financially inclusive of individual humans, the data subjects, the originators of the resource of one upon which AI is trained and deployed at runtime. It's absolutely inseparable. It's integral. It's at the heart of it. So I
love that. That was a great answer. And I think for me, I heard two things. One, identification. I didn't think about agents, but you have no idea if you're actually talking to ChatGPT or something else.
Exactly.
There's
none whatsoever.
There's no idea on the other side. That's fascinating. And then also the money. I think it's dumb in today's world. My bank still holds a check for 3 days. Like, what are we doing? We know we can do all of this at light speed. If you send me money, why does Venmo hold it for 3 days before they put it in my bank account? There's no reason that should happen.
Yeah, and it's not Venmo holding it. It's the bank. And
right.
I mean, across the whole ecosystem, everybody earns on the float, and there's 24-hour arbitrage cycles. It's a huge, enormous hustle, which might be all fine and good ways to generate wealth, but it certainly doesn't aid individual.
No, not generating wealth for me, for sure. All right. Well, an amazing conversation. It was so much fun. Heather, thank you for being here again. Heather Leigh Flannery, AI-Mindsystems.org. And also check out the National Hero Initiative. Amazing work that she is doing. I really appreciate your expertise that showed through. Last thing, last swing at it. Anything you can do to help us or we can do to help you?
Mike, I'm honored to be on your show today. And I think that the community of technically oriented marketers around the world have much more of an active role to play in how the world is shaped than they might realize. And I think just encouraging marketing professionals around the world to entertain new ways, new options, and consider a different paradigm where personal data is inseparable from personhood. And what would that mean? What would that mean to all of us? So that's my closing remark.
I love it. Great ask. And I do think marketers play a big role in spreading the good word of things that you're trying to do and the issues and solutions that we talked about today. So that's amazing. Until next time, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody that you think needs to hear it. Help us spread that good word. Reach out if you have suggestions or questions and topics that you would like me to cover. It's avenue9.com. Human First AI Marketing, helping you figure out this new world of AI and artificial intelligence. Until next time, keep going. Have fun with it, everybody. We'll see you.